Hey, what's going on, Summit students, parents? My name is Reagan Jones. I'm the Apex student director. And with me today, we have Victor Gansito, who is our student director at the downtown Durham campus. And he is also the communications director for students as well. Vic, can you just explain what communications director is? What do you do at Summit? And why are we even talking today?
Yeah, so I have the unique privilege of serving as the communications director for our student ministry. Essentially, the things that I oversee are things like social media, things like email communication, things like marketing, all of those fun things that you see across the internet that have to do with Summit students. And that's the part of my job that I like, but the part of my job that I love is being able to step into
Yeah.
conversations like these. We talk about what are the implications about technology and social media and the internet on you as a parent and
Yeah.
on your students as students. And so it's kind of a twofold job, and I definitely love this piece of that job more. It's a thing that I've been very passionate about for a really long time.
Yeah. If you can't tell, just looking by his background, he loves
No.
loves loves the internet, pop culture, and anything Star Wars.
Yep, pretty
But
much.
I think even in this new format of just kind of parent equips, I asked a couple of you guys, like, hey, it's just for some feedback on what you'd want. And technology, the internet, social media, and what this is doing to our kids was like one of the number one things that I got back from you guys as parents. And so today, like, we're going to end with some practical resources and like, hey, here's how you engage in social media. Here's how you don't engage in social media. Like, that is when we say partnering with parents, that is y'all's decision to make. And we're not going to make that decision for you guys. Where we want to start in this conversation is actually how technology has influenced your kid. And so Vic, why don't you even start us off there? Like, man, how has Gen Z growing up and being raised in a social media and an internet generation, man, how has that shaped the way they think, the way they approach things, and the way they ask questions?
Yeah, I think the most fundamental thing that we all have to realize is that this is new for all of us. This is
Yeah.
new for everyone. When I was a kid, I was born in 97. Reagan, I know you were born in what, 96, so we're relatively the same age, but even as
97,
we
stop.
Oh, you're 97? Dang.
Yeah.
Even as we were kids, like we weren't growing up being able to be in high school and scroll on TikTok, right? Like TikTok wasn't a thing. The internet wasn't the way that it is now, even when we were in high school.
Yeah.
We have to understand that this is a new thing for all of us. And the fact that parents want to engage in this conversation, want to grow in their understanding in this conversation is a really encouraging thing because it shows that they care. They care about the
Yeah.
discipleship of their kids. And that's really where we ought to be, right? Like the Bible commissions parents to raise their kids up in homes that love Jesus. And the fact that we have parents that are pursuing this conversation is really encouraging to me, and it's a great first step. The thing that I have to think about when I think about influence, when I think about students growing up in a technology age, is students, really anyone, can be an authority on anything.
Yeah.
And so, what that's made me realize is that there is a growing lack of, or a growing need for authority. Now, that's not true, but that's the perception that students have because they have all the information they could ever need at their fingertips. And so,
Yeah.
my parents could tell me as we were driving in the car late at night that having the two lights on in the back seat was illegal, right? My
Yeah.
dad would be like, hey, that's illegal. You can't do that because it
Yeah.
had like a glare on the front screen. But
Yeah.
now, if I were to ever do that with, my kid in the back car or back seat or whatever, like they could just is driving
Yeah.
with the lights on in the back seat illegal, and it would say no, and you would realize that all of a sudden, like you've lost credibility in that area, and it's
Yeah.
really because students can have access to all sorts of information almost immediately. And so when we look
Yeah.
at influence, we have to realize that whether we want them to be influenced by technology and the internet and social media, whether or not we want that, that is one of, if not the primary influences in your kid's life. Even if they don't
Yeah.
have a cell phone, even if they're not connected to the internet at home, I promise you at school or in
Yeah.
other spheres of their lives, they are. And
Yeah.
so we have to enter into this conversation with that understanding.
Yeah. I love that you even mentioned where it's like this wasn't a conversation in student ministry even 10 years ago. Because neither one of us, like, we were both teenagers when social media was a thing. The internet was really becoming popularized. Like, a lot of you guys as parents did not grow up with social media or the internet at your hand. And so this is very much a new concept and a new idea that student ministries and you guys as parents, as we're trying to work through together. Not necessarily on like, is this good or is this bad? We're not here to decide moral conversations, but like, we're here. What do we do? How do we build this plane as it's flying? And so I think the things that I've seen a lot of times in my conversations with students and some of our conversations with you guys as parents is the fact that your kid was raised in the internet age where they have the answers at their fingertips or their friend has a fingertips. Like any seventh grader with an iPhone is an expert now. That has made questions of faith a lot harder for students to answer. Where even when I was growing up, but especially when you guys were growing up as parents, like the answer because the Bible says so was sufficient. And it's not that it's not true. Like being true and being sufficient are two different conversations. And a lot of the times as parents, as we try to disciple our kids, or even like me as a student director, like when I try to tell kids, like, why do we do this certain thing? Well, because Jesus tells us to do, and the Bible says so. That may be true, but they can look up on the internet, they can go to their phone and hear 17 different articles that will give them a different worldview. So what they have at their fingertips is the opinions of the world at all times. And this is the most educated group of 15-year-olds I think the world has ever seen. And I think that makes discipleship really, really difficult. Because especially in the home where it's like, okay, well, this is when you're trying to, as you said, to train them up in the way they should go. When we're using old methods of discipleship, that's very much, I said this, therefore it's true, with a generation of saying like, actually, what do I believe is true? And here's all of these opinions. And now I can find the world's opinions and choose whichever one fits me. It just makes discipleship very, very hard in the home. And so, Vic, man, I think I would throw that back to you. Like, one, okay, that's where my kid is coming from generally. Again, we're going to make a lot of generalizations here. Like this may not 100% fit your kid, and that's completely okay. If that's generally where this generation is at, how as parents do we disciple that? Like how do we step into that? Especially because it's like, if they have all of the answers, that feels like an incredible burden on my shoulders to know every single answer. And so do I have to know all of the answers in order to disciple my kid properly? I'm like, where do parents go from here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple like fundamental pieces that we have to understand. And I think the first one is really just stepping into a sphere that we're very unfamiliar with. Christians have this tendency to mark anything that they're unfamiliar with as sin. Right. And it's the desire out of that is, okay, well, this is unfamiliar. I don't want to play with sin. I don't want to toy with sin. I hate sin. And so therefore I'm going to reject this thing because I don't know what it is. And so the desire there is to hate sin. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
But out of that spawns a relationship where you're very disconnected from the world that your student is forced to live in at some point in their life. Right. Whether that's now in their home, or when they graduate and go off to college or go into the workforce or whatever it may be, right? So Dallas Willard, he wrote an amazing book called Renovation of the Heart. I recommend it to everyone. It's an amazing read. And one of his chapters in that book is titled The Foundation of Care is Understanding. And that title took me back because it really helped me reshape the way that I think about caring for my students, where he makes the argument that you can't really care for or about something unless you've taken the time to deeply understand it, right?
Yeah.
So using a basketball illustration, or I'll use a hockey one since that's the world that I'm in. I'm a huge Tampa Bay Lightning fan. But how could I care about the Tampa Bay Lightning as a team if I didn't have a foundational understanding of what the sport of hockey was about?
Yeah.
I could say that I care about the team. I could say I'm from Florida, and so I ought to care about the team, but I really don't care about the team because I don't really have an understanding of what hockey is about. And so for you to have to really step into the world of your student and to care for them, you actually have to take a step into that world. It doesn't mean become like the world or conform to the world. That's not what that means. It actually means, hey, let's take a step. Let's do some research. Let's study. Let's find out what these students and what these kids are dealing with, so that we can better understand where they're at and then out of that, we can actually then better care for them. And so I think that's one of like the foundational first steps that parents ought to take. And the fact that parents are here listening to this Parent Equip right now is proof that that is the first step that you're taking. So I want to commend parents for that. But I can't emphasize that point enough. The foundation of care is understanding. We cannot care for this next generation if we don't pursue understanding what they're going through.
Well, and then for a parent who's in a completely different generation, like how do we practically step into our student space? Well, one, they may not even be letting us in the first place. Like, and so that's a two-way street. So like, how do we step into our student spaces and pursue understanding together?
Yeah, there's this video that went viral a while ago where it's like a parent trying to use all of like the hip lingo that like the kid is using, and like the kid always responds to that as like, stop, like what are you doing? Like stop saying cap. Why are you saying cap? Like you don't need to be saying cap, right? So like there's a way where you can do that, and it's like kind of cringe, or it's like it's not really the best way to do it. I always recommend taking a step and just doing some research, and so there are two resources that I actually have that I love to give to parents because they're not how-to guides on how to set up parental controls on TikTok. Those things are good, and we should have those conversations, but that's not the thing that will make your student become more like Jesus. The thing that can help your student become more like Jesus is you stepping into their world and discipling them, right? So one of the things that a parent at Downtown Durham does is like they're very hesitant about the content that their kid would be watching on TikTok if they weren't around. Like TikTok is full of crazy stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what this parent does is they actually watch TikToks with their kid. And when something comes up that may not align with their worldview, or when something comes up that may not be Christian or maybe a little inappropriate, they have such an amazing opportunity to say, hey, actually, like you may think this is funny or you might think this is cool, but actually what Jesus tells us, it turns into a discipleship moment. And so being able to step into their world is more than just setting up rules and regulations for them to follow. It's more about you stepping into their world and playing a video game with your kid. What would it look like for you to play Mario Kart with your students, or Super Smash Bros with your students? Or what would it look like for you to step into that world just a little bit? Because that will help you fundamentally understand your student so much more, just by the way they respond to certain things. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. Well, I think even for the parent that doesn't feel confident in their ability to play Fortnite with their kids, like I think tangible example for me, we had a student that came up recently and was like, "Hey, I don't really know if the Bible is trustworthy. Like, I don't know if I have a conclusion on it." But I'm like, this is a kid that's like 15 years old, like 16 years old. Those were not questions that I was wrestling with at 16. But because, again, he's a product of the internet age, like he's hearing opinions and different things. And so he's coming to the conclusion of like, well, I don't really know if the Bible is reliable. And he comes to me and I'm like, I know the Bible's reliable, but how? Like, I am not intellectually there. Like, I don't know if I can 100% lead you in that conversation. And one of the most beneficial things is simply saying, I don't know, but let's find out together.
Yes, absolutely.
And so in the same way, it's like where you can sit down and play Mario Kart and enter into that space with your kid. Entering into your students' intellectual curiosity is also one of the better things, because you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have all the spaces. And one of the things the internet age has done for our kids is create like a desire for answers within them.
Yeah.
Because there's an answer for everything on the internet, and that has created and translated over to their spiritual life, where there should be an answer for everything. And in that, we also have to wrestle with like, we serve a God who is literally outside of time, who was and is to come. So there's not going to be answers for everything. We're not dealing with math, we're dealing with God. And so there is not always answers for everything, but in the things where it's like, okay, is the Bible reliable? Maybe you watch a TikTok and you have this position and you have this position, or your friend at school who looked up this article on the internet says this. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it and let's pursue it together. I think the day and age and discipleship of just saying, well, this is the answer and you have to believe it with this generation of kids doesn't work. Even if it's true, it's an insufficient method of discipleship, which is going to leave our kids walking away wanting more.
students, if students are much more, this generation is much more experiential based, right? We've talked about this before in students. We've moved from I forget the way that you worded, I think therefore I am, to I feel therefore it's true, or something like that. Like emotions are the driving thing. And you may be a parent, you may be in a family where you've never really had like a hard church experience, right? You've never experienced church hurt. But what's happening that I see more and more common now is that they're second and third hand. So like a student may hear from another student that they had a really bad experience in church.
Yeah. That's
so
good.
Now that student is
that's
like,
good.
oh, I don't want to be a part of that.
That's good.
Like you had to go through that. And so maybe you have been through church hurt and it's really hard. And like, that is what like our church staff is here. Like we want to partner with you in working through that. But we also have to understand, like our students are hearing stories from their friends, hearing potential bad experiences.
Yeah.
And they're owning that as their own. And that carries way more logical truth to them than saying the Bible's true, so you should believe it. And so really the only way we can get into those conversations is if we break the wall down that's hindering communication. Like we have to step into our students' lives and into what they love and into their hobbies and into their sports and into their crafts. We have to hop into all of those things so that we can build trust together. When you have trust, man, you will be surprised by how willing people are to just share things about what's going on. Hey, my friend said this at school, and I don't think it's right, or I don't think it's true, or I think I believe this instead. And those lines of communications have to exist in order for you to know what they're processing and what they're thinking.
Yeah. I love that you said that students start with emotions now instead of logic. Again, not every kid is the same. This is just general Gen Z. But what the internet has done is it's flatlined the earth in the sense of like 15, 20 years ago, experiences were very segmented to where like, if I had this and someone had this, then like, but now it's like everyone's stories cross over. And so everybody kind of experiences the same thing, and it's this big hodgepodge of different things. And so that's why sometimes it feels like your kids' opinions are like here one day, here another day, here another day, and here another day, because they like so deeply want to empathize with their friends and sympathize with the things that they're going through, that they will take up the causes, the beliefs, the hurts of their friends, sometimes to the detriment of their own thoughts, emotions, or beliefs. And I think that is something that we can like affirm in our kids, is like they have a strong desire to want to empathize with their friends, a strong desire for truth, a very strong desire for justice. Those are all characteristics of God, by the way. I'm like, thank God the Lord had empathy and compassion to send his son to die on the cross. Like, thank God he's a God of justice. Like, those things are not bad. And so in that, it's just understanding generally where our kids are starting from, because the place that your student is starting from is a different place that you and I started from 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And so Vic, we'll kind of wrap up with this. One, what would you say to the parent that does not feel overly encouraged?
For sure.
At the end of this, I think Jen Wilkin puts it this way. It's like basically parenting an alien child, where it's like, I don't know who this kid is. And kind of peeling back the layers of that doesn't make me feel better. It actually makes the gap feel further. Man, what would you say to a parent that feels like they don't really know where to go from here?
Yeah, when it comes to this conversation in particular, I'm always reminded of 2 Corinthians 12. And this is really true about any hard conversation. In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul is wrestling with God. He says that there's like this messenger from Satan that's been sent to him to like torment him or to taunt him. He calls it this thorn. And for a lot of parents, I'm sure you feel like the social media or this technology question is like a thorn. It's like something that exists that you don't really like, that you wish was gone, and it's like taunting you. It's always reminding you of how, of how not up to the task you are. But if you finish 2 Corinthians 12, Paul comes to this realization after he cries out to God, where God responds. He says, hey, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I can boast more gladly in my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. And so to the parent who feels like after listening to this conversation, the gap went from here to here, and you're more discouraged about how crazy the internet is, man, I just want to remind you that Christ's power is made perfect in our weakness. And he's the one that ultimately will not only sustain your student, but will sustain you. And so as you feel your incapability grow, like you're not capable of doing this, that's actually a really good thing, because it makes you depend on the God of the universe.
There it is.
Who's far more sufficient to stand in that gap than you are. Because like, Reagan, as you kind of noted at the beginning of this conversation, man, this is something that feels like it's impossible. We have no control over this. Something that's really weighty. We feel a responsibility. And while all those things are true, man, in that weightiness, in that responsibility, man, we have to look to God to fill that gap. We have to be dependent on him, because he's the only one that is capable. He's the only one that's sufficient to fill that gap. And so to the parent that's discouraged, I get it. Like, it seems really, really hard, but just remember that you have a God up in heaven who's looking down on you saying, hey, even though you are weak, my grace, my power is made perfect in that weakness. And like, that ought to give us the confidence that we need, not to handle every conversation perfectly, but to know that there's a God in heaven looking down on us with grace and forgiveness when we mess up. Knowing that he will be the one to stand into that gap. And so it doesn't fix the problem, and that's frustrating, but it ought to comfort us when we have to step into those conversations and those difficult things.
I love that, man. I know that feels like a Jesus juke, but that's actually where the real power lies.
Yeah.
I think as we end this, there are probably some parents that literally clicked on this link that just went like, hey, is TikTok good? Is TikTok bad? Is Instagram good? Is Instagram bad? Sorry, we don't have the answers for that. But man, what are some like easy resources that you can plug for parents here that can help parents navigate social media, the internet, this growing world that just feels very out of control?
Yeah. So the first resource that I found is incredible. This thing has been amazing, and it's by a company or a ministry called Axis. And they have a weekly newsletter that goes out every Friday called The Culture Translator. And basically what this newsletter is aimed to do, basically what it does is it takes the 5 most trending things that are happening in the world of Gen Z, and it translates them to be, understood and digested from someone who's not in Gen Z culture. And so they talk about things like trends on TikTok. They'll talk about language, like what does no cap mean, right? Or like what do these things mean, so that you can better understand and have conversations with your kids. And they have all sorts of resources on their website. It's axis.org. I heavily, heavily, heavily recommend this website, and hopefully they definitely take a more like discipleship approach. So they're not going to be the ones to tell you if your kid should be on social media or not, but they're going to be the ones to help you discern whether or not some of these platforms and social media is like a good thing for your student to entertain. It gives you all of the practical how-tos to use all your parental controls and all the stuff like that. So axis.org, heavily recommend. The other resource is a really selfish resource because it's my resource. The Lord has just like really put on my heart this type of conversation. How do we equip student pastors, student leaders, church leaders, and parents to engage with the next generation well? And as the Lord has just put that conviction on my heart, he just allowed me to start a YouTube channel where I talk a lot about these things, get super practical, 3 things that you can do on TikTok to help, make sure that your kid is watching appropriate content, but also more of these conversations. How can we disciple our kids to grow in their knowledge and love for Jesus? And so that YouTube channel is called The Social Student Pastor. You can just type it into YouTube and it'll come right up. I'm sure Reagan will be able to type notes up and include those links for you guys. But those are my 2 resources that, Axis I really trust and really love, and a lot of the stuff on the Social Student Pastor I actually take from Axis and just reword to fit more of a Gen Z or a younger audience. And so those are two resources I heavily recommend. And I think every student director or pastor at our church would stand by Axis as well.
Yeah. I think there's also another book, Vic, you put me onto this book. It's called Know Thy Gamer. I forget who it's actually by, but it's basically for like, I mean, gaming, I've heard people say is like basically the new football. It's like, it's the thing that unites everyone and everybody does it. And so understanding what games are, how do we engage in this, the gaming sphere, everything like that. Also, you have a great resource in your 15-year-old at home.
For
where
sure.
It's like that is probably the best resource you have in just asking them questions and seeing what they like, and where we go from there.
Know Thy Gamer is by Drew Dixon. And if you have a student that loves video games, it is a phenomenal resource.
Yeah.
Cannot recommend that enough. Drew Dixon, Know Thy Gamer.
Yeah. Well, cool. Hey, parents, we hope this was helpful. Again, we're just going to do one a month of these, send them out in this email format. You can find all these videos on the YouTube channel in the link. But we hope this has at least been eye-opening to understanding your student a little bit better. These are not meant to be silver bullets. These are not meant to be like the end-all be-all, but little conversations where if you can understand where your student is coming from, at least in the culture, like generationally, it may be able to help us understand them and disciple them a little bit better. And so that's the goal of these conversations. Vic, thanks for hopping on, man. And
man.
Parents, we love you guys. You are sent.